Psychological horror from one of the masters. It's Ingmar Bergman's 1968 film, Hour of the Wolf. Let me tell you why I think this movie is quite good and why I would recommend it to you if you've never seen a Bergman movie or if you know a few Bergman movies. I think this is a good one for modern audiences. Coming up next. Hour of the Wolf stars Max von Sydow and Liv Ullmann, two Bergman mainstays. You'll see them in several of his movies. And here Bergman uses them as a couple, a married couple, who go to a remote island to have a bit of a vacation. The Max von Sydow character, Johann Borg, is a painter where he's going to perhaps produce art, have some relaxing moments, and get away from it all. This is a typical Bergman premise he's been doing since the 1940s. In fact, you watch his filmography and you go, another remote island story? But yes, here he goes again. He had just made Persona 2 years prior in 1966, obviously his famous avant-garde classic in which two women go to a cottage by the sea. And here you have something very similar. Setting by the sea, although it's Edenic and it has these male-female Adam and Eve characters, actually explores the mind or mental illness, the mind going crazy as it were, and the delusions of the artist, but perhaps also of other people in the movie. In fact, if you've seen Persona, you should probably watch this movie to see how much they overlap as well. Through a Glass Darkly, probably. Even The Seventh Seal to some extent. These movies are speaking into this horror movie by Bergman. Thus, I think overall, as a judgment call, a lot of people are going to like this because it looks modern and fresh. It's related to the psychological horror genre. Maybe the movies lately by Ari Aster or The Lighthouse. Even Kubrick's The Shining, the setting for this and some of the plot elements are maybe inspirations just a little bit for The Shining by Kubrick. This review won't have any spoilers, but I will tell you a few things. This artist starts to go mad on the island. He eventually meets a baron who is supposedly staying at a castle nearby. He and his wife, this artist and his wife, go to the castle to have dinner. But there's a point in the movie where we ask ourselves, and it's fairly early on, what are we seeing in this movie, and is any of it really happening, or is it happening in the mind of this artist, or in the mind of his wife? In fact, the framing device for this movie is his wife reading the diary of the artist. You thus have sort of a nested, unreliable narrators in this movie. You have the diary, you have then the artist and what he sees, but then you have his wife, and here's where Persona comes in. In Persona, you have this idea that two people spending a lot of time together and being close sort of become quite a bit alike. And in this movie, that comes up overtly. In fact, it's said a couple times in marriage, don't males and females sort of blend together and sort of talk like each other and begin to look like each other the more they spend time with each other? Well, if this male artist is going crazy on this island, what do you think is happening to his wife? And I'm only suggesting maybe there's something a little off or something a little unreliable about her. So you have her as an unreliable narrator, the diary is unreliable, and it's just a feast for those of us who love ambiguity in movies, trying to figure out what exactly is real and what's not real in this movie. This is a descent into madness story for the artist. It's psychological horror, as I said, but I find that there's some folklore elements. You can kind of tell that by the title of the movie, Hour of the Wolf. Some werewolf theme, perhaps, some Dracula themes, and even though this is the mid-20th century, when, guess what, modern psychology says there's no such thing as monsters or fairies, and they sort of do away with fairyland, as it were. I think Bergman actually likes fairy tales. I think he's actually at his best when he's dealing with fairy tale-like elements, say in The Seventh Seal, for example, or here in this movie. And as I said in my Letterboxd review of this, you know, if he were living 250 years prior to this, he would have been Hans Christian Andersen. He would have been making up children's fairy tales and including incest and cannibalism and all the weird, terrible elements that some of those old European fairy tale stories contain. This movie sort of takes out all of those elements, but then focuses on the mind. The mind is the place that creates delusions. The mind is a house of horrors. And this artist's mind in particular, you see how it works. Just like in Persona, where we sort of get into those two ladies' minds in that movie, and it's a little weird and uncertain. This is a much deeper dive into a much more complex and scary place, which is this man's mind. This is a theme that Bergman had been dealing with in Through the Glass Darkly, for example, an island retreat where 4 people are at. three men and a woman who's married to one of the men, a brother and father, but you only see her mental illness and see the results of it. You don't go inside her, because that's a forbidden interior that Bergman can't peer into, or doesn't seem to want to at that point in time in the early 1960s. By this point, Hour of the Wolf in the late 1960s, we are definitely going into the mind of a demented or twisted person who's going crazy, so-called, person who has delusions or dreams. What's that look like? Bergman's going to show you, and it looks quite a bit like modern Ari Aster movies or other sort of psychological horror tales. And you'll note at this point, Bergman is still hanging on to black and white cinematography. He's only made one color movie, which is arguably his worst one, called All These Women. And at this point, he should be going into color, but he's not. And that gives this movie a classic, haunting film noir look. In fact, Bergman started out sort of in the film noir genre, doing a few of his early movies in that. This is going back to that, plus adding some avant-garde stuff. So it's older and newer Bergman put together. It's a really interesting movie overall if you're going to see a lot of Bergman, but also it's a good movie just if this is your only Bergman movie, to try to get a grip on what he's about. This has some of those elements, including dealing with mentally ill people, dealing with a spouse who seems to be off or is depressed or something like that, the fantasy island scenario. All these are here in this very interesting movie. I recommend Howard the Wolf to you. It's one of the few Bergman movies that really struck me and I went, oh, that's great, or oh, that's interesting. Usually he's a little cold and distant to me, but this Scandinavian sort of bleak bear style works here a lot. I like this movie quite a bit, and I will be rewatching this, so check this movie out. What do you think about it? Please leave us some comments, and please subscribe to this channel for more great content. Thank you, and have a great day.